Hey everybody, this is Dark Guardsman. We're back with another video. Now, I was planning on making a few videos while I worked on this next set of content, but inevitably just ended up doing pretty much everything, and then now we're here. For those who haven't been following along, the last couple videos, we were talking about atomic science, getting atomic science kind of working, showing off the progress being made. As you can see, we've got basically progress. Last video I did show off that we actually had the steam turbines running, so we got steam turbines, talked about different functionality that we eventually do plan to implement with them, showed that they were working, water was boiling. Previous episode of that we did the steam funnels, we showed that they were working and running and everything else, so that's all done there. There's our power management basically done via the steam funnel, the turbines and the reactor, all cool and everything, but that's it, just kind of cool without a lot of other stuff. It's not gameplay ready yet. But we're getting really close to it being gameplay ready, because I just finished one of the larger chunks of content required to get going, which is the entire processing chain over here. Now, from the last video, I did at the very end talk about the processing chain, what we were planning on doing, showing different designs, talking about kind of why I was doing what we were doing. Now, the original design for atomic science involved pretty much just a boiler and a centrifuge. You would boil the ore, get uranium hexafluoride, then you would centrifuge that to get your pellets at a random rate, kind of doing whatever. Eventually a chemical extractor was added, which created yellow cake, which then would give you a bonus, and that was about it. That was all the mod really had for processing machine. Really simplistic, kind of partially inspired by a few other mods in the way they did various things. I don't have full notes on exactly why it was designed the way it was, but I decided I was going to go with a similar design process for this and simply just make it more modern and give it a lot more functionality and features to it, which is with the introduction of the waste mechanic and the waste recovery mechanic. So each step now in the processing chain will produce some kind of waste material. In this case, it would be liquid mineral waste from the chemical extractor, which is basically a sludge. It contains minerals, contains toxic material, contains water, which then you would boil, which will make contaminated water, and a solid mineral waste, which then contaminated water can be turned back into water and more solid mineral waste, which then could be chemical extracted to give you random mineral dust, which is going to be iron, could be copper. This system still needs more work, as I'll show it to you and I'll explain it to you when we get to that point. Stone dust and toxic waste, which toxic waste is going to be like a final byproduct that you really can't do anything with yet, though I do plan to eventually tie this back into the uranium hexafluoride step, so that way you can get just a little bit more uranium out of it, and eventually you'll be able to get like other minerals and elements out of it as well in the far future when we actually get a lot more content down the road. This is kind of what everything looks like. Kind of what I plan to do with it, and kind of what it's going to look like as I show it off to you, because I did follow this pretty much 1-for-1 ratio as I implemented everything in the game. Now, the machines that are implemented are the same exact machines that were in the previous version, with some small modifications based on what I needed to do with it. So you've got the chemical extractor, basically the same exact model. The only difference, I believe, I added some extra GUIs to it and stuff. We'll get to that as we go. The boiler, which is a different model. This actually was originally the fusion reactor model in the older mod. However, I do remember that when these models were originally given to Cal Lobby to work on atomic science, that they were actually meant to be used for the boiler. So this was actually meant to be the boiler's model, therefore I'm using it as a boiler. Plus, it does look nicer. This looks much closer to a boiler than the previous model. And the previous model was originally meant to be a preheater for the reactor, to kind of get the reactors to heat up faster, or get the fusion reactor to heat up, but somehow managed to become the boiler, and this model managed to become the fusion core. I could talk about that all a different episode all day. And then we've got the centrifuge, which the changes to this one is that now it has an output tank as well as an input tank. So originally this had an input tank, a battery slot, an output slot, and that was it. Didn't have a lot really going for it. Of course, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done on these GUIs. As you can tell, I still have to translate them, even though I could have swore that I did the translations for these, but I think I forgot to put .name at the end of these, so that you're seeing kind of what those look like. But these all do work. So we've got the chain process. So the first step in the process, of course, you want to be able to turn your ore into yellow cake. So this will go in here. This will be turned into yellow cake dust. You'll get about 3 per every ore, which then will produce some toxic sludge over here. I still got to add some tooltips to kind of tell you what's in the tanks. That'll come here as I polish. A lot of polish work still left to do, hence why it's going to be released here near the end of the month and not at the end of this week, because at the end of this week, we're hitting about the 25th. The end of the month is actually the middle of next week, so I've got about that much time that I kind of need. I'm pretty sure that we're gonna release probably the first here, but it'll probably be done somewhere in the earlier of the week, which I'll I'll go ahead and drop an early release on Patreon for people to toy with and play around with if I get it done enough. But anyways, this produces a toxic sludge. You can, of course, go and start directly into the waste recovery process, which you can turn the toxic sludge into contaminated water and, of course, waste product dust. Right now, I've got the waste product dust dumping into a chest over here, collecting because I'm not processing it as quickly as I'm producing it. So we've got that dust in here. I am probably going to redo these textures. I kind of went and just grabbed the yellow cake dust texture and just colorized it really quick, just so I have something done. The plan is to probably make this a block so you can actually store this material in world if you want to for cosmetic effects. So that will probably mean we'll change the texture. Let me kill the rain. I don't have my kill rain mod actually installed, so the rain actually is running. I remember last episode I accidentally had the rain run. I had my audio turned down really low, so I didn't even notice it was running. But this will, anyways, produce a random or produce dust, which will then get pumped in the extractor, which will then produce a random dust item. And this will run quite a bit before it actually outputs a dust if you accidentally leave stuff in the output slot, because it's going to randomize every single time it runs this recipe. It's going to randomly check to see if we can output, and if it cannot output in that slot, it'll basically just rerun again and again and again. So just keep that in mind when you actually are using these machines. I did design them intentionally to do that, to make the code easier to work with, but it will cause more power drain when I implement the power. So make sure you actually do have a proper output to capacitate all the dust. And keep in mind the hopper likes to stick stuff in slots and not actually stack things. So you might actually have to go through and do a little bit better process with this. You probably want to use thermal expansion pipes or BuiltCraft pipes or Ender IO or some other mod. But that gets most of your processing chain right there. Of course, you can take the contaminated water and pump it into centrifuges, which will then give us our water back. You can, if you design your system just right, make it so that way you never lose water, because this will always guarantee you get the water back that you put into the system. So you could actually take these pipes, reconnect them back into this step over here, and theoretically have enough water to run the machines. Because of course, the reason I mean this theoretically is because the pipe flow may result in not working perfectly. But that's definitely something you'd have to toy around with. And actually, on this note, I need some way to get rid of the water because these are full. But yeah, so that gets that. And then of course, the output of this will go into a boiler, which will then turn this into the hexafluoride gas, which it eventually will run if we sit here long enough and watch it. Let me get rid of this hopper here. We no longer need it. I have some extra yellow cake dust that I dumped into there. If this will run. It looks like the tank might be just a tad bit too full. Let's go ahead and break this and place it back down. And this will give it a chance to run again. The animations all run about the same speed, and they are synced to the client. So the client will sync a little bit of progress to the client. And as long as the client is running in a certain regard, it actually will... or as long as the server is running at least a little bit of progress, the animation will run client side. That's about the only data that gets synchronized to that. The GUIs will synchronize the rest. So if you don't have the GUI open, you're actually going to get very little data being synchronized. And it will only synchronize on recipe change. So there actually is a lot of... code that just detects when stuff changes. And when you put fluid in there, it'll synchronize, and when you put an item in there, it'll synchronize or remove an item. Anyways, this will go in here. This will start processing. This will produce, of course, your contaminated mineral water is what it basically is, or toxic mineral water. Actually, let me see what I named it. Contaminated mineral solution. Basically, radioactive material, kind of really light. What you could think of it is like if somebody dropped a couple flakes of radioactive material in water and a couple flakes of dust in water. This will run. And eventually it will output the material if it actually gets around to it. Theoretically, it's supposed to do this. I've had some issues with the pipes here while working. And I can't tell if it is a problem with the actual boiler or if it's a problem with the thermal expansion pipes. Because I know the machine itself will output fluid if I let it. Although the way to actually get it to output fluid at the moment, because I don't have the full support running, is that you would actually have to click it with a stick. And this will tell it to output gas, and it will actually output. So it looks like there's a problem with the thermal expansion detecting the correct fluid. This will output, of course, stored in the tank, and then I pull it again, which then will actually go into the centrifuge. The centrifuge will then, of course, make our material here. I have it set to only produce uranium-235 at the moment, because uranium-238 does not have a use in the mod. And I'm going to actually add code to have it detect ICBM, or detect other mods, or have mods trigger and enable it to start producing 238. Along with other things. I actually probably will actually start making this do 234 as well, because conceptually wise, how this is supposed to work is you produce 234, 235, and 238, and that 234 is basically next to useless if I remember correctly. 235 is your main reactor fuel, and 238 is when you start making bombs out of. Of course, there'll be some enrichment steps as well to actually get the bombs going. But it actually will produce fuel at a really quick rate. It uses about 200 uranium hexafluoride per pellet and does run through it pretty quickly. This will take a lot longer to produce, because this only produces, I think, 250 for yellow cake and 600 for ore. So you end up getting 150 more uranium hexafluoride by using yellow cake than you do actually ore. I actually added that bonus in there, so there actually is more of a reason to use yellow cake than just simply getting more for your buck. You actually will get a slight bonus out of it, which is really nice. Eventually the processing speed will also go up, so you actually process yellow cake at about 4 times the speed of uranium ore. Uranium ore will have an incredibly slow processing rate, and eventually uranium ore will also produce a much more mineral heavy solution out the end. I actually may end up, oh no, actually I think I already have a program for this. This is what the dark green sludge is. But that's a processing step there. The steps that we have to do after this is just a lot of polish. I got to go through, do all the recipes, I got to do all the balance, I got to finish the radiation system. As you can see in the top right corner, it's running. I don't have armor on at the moment. I've got to work on that. Let me actually pop some armor on just to make sure it's still working. What the hell, we can just do this way. Number keys for the win. So I still got to work on that. I still got to work on the environmental radiation. It's working perfectly. There's just a few things I want to implement, things like ray tracing and a little bit more detection for materials. Thermal system's working. Does need a little bit more balance because the reactors are producing a ridiculous amount of heats. There's a configuration system that still needs to be worked on, so you guys can adjust all these numbers yourself and actually play around with them and get them running. And after that, we're at a beta release, and this will be first beta release. Beta release will contain the processing system and the reactors. The next block of content that will be coming out after that will be the fusion reactor, which will take a while to implement because I plan to redesign that reactor completely. I'm actually not going to copy the original one because the new thermal system will have trouble dealing with how the reactor would work. So I'll have to actually sit there and figure out how we're going to design that in order to make it work with the thermal system. The reason why it will not probably work with the new thermal system is that how the fusion reactor worked in the old mod is it produced a plasma block, and the plasma block kind of moved around a lot, causing a ton of block updates, which we don't want with the thermal system. Thermal system is not designed for having a lot of block updates happen at once. And each of those blocks produced heat, and that heat, of course, boiled steam and everything else. Now, I still want each of those blocks to produce heat, but what I want the fusion reactor to do is not spit a whole bunch of plasma out and have that plasma decay over time. Instead, what I'm thinking about doing is having a multi-block plasma reactor that'll be something kind of about the size of this right here, that will then produce the plasma through plasma conduits and stuff, and then into your actual plasma containment field. Which is what the old mod kind of designed, is that you use the electromagnetic coils as your containment field, which then the plasma will just fill that chamber up, and as long as you can keep producing plasma, so as long as the reactor stays on, no new blocks will be created, no old blocks will be removed. It'll stay in a static state of continue running, which then will produce heat, and that heat will also be statically catched, because these reactors actually do statically catch the heat. And how it works is that when you actually disable the reactor, it will go through and it will remove all of its static values out of the map, decaying them all back to 0, and that will then statically catch that value. So you have no actively running updates. The only actively running updates you actually end up with is when players move around. So if I'm standing here and I'm producing radiation off my character, say I'm holding radioactive rounds, if I move from this block to this block, it'll then remove the value off the last block and put it on the block I'm standing on, which is really cool. It makes the system work really well, very simplistically, and actually get everything going. And the heat system is exactly the same. It's the reason why the fusion reactor will have to be reworked. Plus, I kind of just want to rework it to make it more enjoyable to play with, because if I build the fusion reactor exactly like the old one was, there wasn't a lot of opportunity to explore creative designs with it. So how the old reactor worked, if I can pull one of these out, is that you pretty much just had a core, and then if I can grab some blocks to play with, because I don't have any electromagnetic blocks, right? And you surrounded it. You surround it with electromagnetic blocks. I think what you could have done is you could also build like a 3x3 of these, and that would produce a little bit more plasma, because then the center core would do all the logic and go, hey, I've got 9 cores around me, so I need to produce 9 times more fluid. But you would build this core, and then you would build, say, you go out a certain amount, and then you'd build this containment chamber. And the containment chamber would be something like this, and it would be about 1 block tall. There wasn't a lot of stuff you do with it. You could kind of put glass to the side so you can see what the reactor was doing. But then it'd vent plasma in here, and the plasma would move around. Of course, you'd have water up here, and the water would boil off, and it would keep boiling off. And that would create your steam, and you get the reactor going. It was kind of cool, but there really wasn't a lot of creativity with it. The fission reactors had a lot more potential with them, because even in the older version, what you could do is build a whole bunch of reactor cores like this, and you could build something that produced a lot of steam very quickly and actually outperform the fusion reactor if you knew what you were doing. I actually had a few examples of server owners telling me when I started updating this mod, or talking about updating this mod, that they had a lot of problems with the older mod where you could exploit the design of these. And of course you could exploit the design of the fusion reactor to create like various designs that would produce huge amounts of power well beyond the capacity of that machine was supposed to be able to do. Anyways, that's about it, so I'll leave you guys here. I'll come back with more content as well, and I'll pretty much be doing more posts on Patreon. For those who actually do the Patreon, I'll probably be putting a lot more updates on there. I'm going to start releasing early versions of mods over there as well, to kind of get some testing going. I want to start getting in a habit of actually properly testing these mods before they get in a release date. And we'll be doing a few other things on there, so just kind of keep updated on there. Of course, Twitter, YouTube, everything else. I'll push updates on that in addition.